Hello, Janet.
Hello, Nimrod.
I'm in Israel and it's, what is it? It's almost noontime. It's very hot outside and you are in Melbourne, right?
I'm in Melbourne and it's 6:40 at night and it's quite cold. I'm sitting with a little heater next to me. As you can see, I've got my woolly jumper on.
Right. And as we know, not everyone watching us may know, but as we know, we are connected by the nature of something we do, which is taking mindfulness and bringing it to the world of children and young adults in different ways. And you're doing it for more than a year or two, quite some time, and I've been doing it for quite some time. And so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we are here in this recorded dialogue in order to share and to discover, you and me, share and discover, with the hope that this discovery, co-discovery and co-sharing will be of some benefit to people involved in this work.
Absolutely. Yes, that's our intention.
So we thought that maybe each of us will give a sense to how did we got to do what we do, because from what I see of mindfulness-based initiatives around the world with children and youth, each initiative is different and each initiative brings the subjective history, personal and professional, synchronistic events of each activist. So maybe you can tell a little bit about how did you become to be this way? How did your way of doing mindfulness evolved in your path?
I've been reflecting on this a bit lately, and I realized when I look back, even when I was quite young, before I'd never heard of meditation as a young child. And of course, I'd never heard of the word mindfulness. And I realized how I just naturally loved meditative experiences. One of the most beautiful memories I have as a child is actually climbing up onto an old garage roof, which was underneath a peppercorn tree, and just being by myself up there in a kind of beautiful, spacious time, looking out over the sky. And I realize now that the seeds were starting then, just in a kind of reverie of childhood. And when I was in my 20s, I actually became aware of that meditation existed and aware of yoga. And as a university student, I started going to study yoga. And I then ultimately started to meditate. My initial introduction was transcendental meditation in my early 20s. And then, as sometimes happens in life, I hit some tsunamis and I ended up with quite significant experiences of mental illness. And then on top of that, a divorce over a number of years. And so I really had no choice but to pay close attention to getting some skills to deal with life. And as a result of that, I was an art teacher for many years and I loved art teaching. But as a result of the huge intensity of those experiences, I actually decided to leave the art room, naively really, and to actually take up full-time work in the field, learning as I went, because there was nowhere to train to learn to teach children mindfulness. And in fact, the mindfulness was still, I'd never heard of in fact, I discovered the concept of mindfulness via Thich Nhat Hanh's work. And that was, oh golly, about 35 years ago. And then I had the good fortune of learning from Dr. Ian Gawler, who's a friend of yours, Nimrod. And I did my first teacher training with him. So, and I just got this huge passion really to support children to learn what I wish I'd been taught as a child, to actually really begin to care for their mind, to get a sense of how the mind works, and to be more ready for life by these having these skills of caring for their mind. So that's why I do what I do, really.
So when more or less, like in the context of time, like you said, 35 years ago, what year was that?
Well, I'm now 66. So so when I hit a really significant turning point around my late 20s and into my 30s. So it was not one specific date, but it was over a
So
period
that
of time.
when was that? 19 what?
Around about 90. Yeah,
1990.
That's when it sort of started. Uh, the Titanic started turning for me, and then there was just no going back. I just the more that I learnt and committed, the more it's just like this path created, and I was very naive really, because I had no business skills, and I didn't even hardly know how to turn a computer on, and so starting the business was quite stressful. But anyway, I feel like I've had lots of blessings along the way, lots of help and support and good fortune with the people I've met, and the synchronicities we were saying before, Nimrod, the synchronicities fell into place. So it just became not just a career. I think it is a life's path for me.
Right.
And what about you, Nimrod? What's your journey into this work?
Different. Believe it or not, each one has its own path. I'll do it semi-quick. In the 70s, I was already an aeronautical engineer in the Israeli Air Force, and I knew that's not what I want, but I didn't know what I do want. I was in Melbourne, actually, in 1979, on the way to New Zealand. I had an uncle in Sydney, so he was on my path to New Zealand as a traveler, as a hippie beginner. And then in New Zealand, I became vegetarian, came back to Melbourne, and Melbourne became important on my path, 1980, because I worked in a health food factory in Melbourne. Very few would remember it. Munchie's Yum Yum Bakery was the name. And it was a spiritual community running a health food bakery. And I learned about food, health food, and baking and making and yogurt making and jam making and whole wheat and brown rice, etc. And that was an important path. And I began to be interested in spirituality in a very beginning way. Back to Israel, I continued my interest and I became a yoga teacher. And at some point, I knew that there's something that should combine the mind-body yoga philosophy, holistic perspectives, and experiential experiences, and what we eat, and something about health and well-being. And I went to the States, that's in the 80s, and I studied naturopathic medicine and became very interested in the mind-body connection and its implication in clinical practice, one-on-one. And then I went back to Israel, and I was only a therapist, nothing about education. I was interested in awareness-based practices and in imagery-based practices and somewhat in meditation-based practices, but less. And I became skillful in mind-body therapeutics, including lecturing in Australia quite a few times through Dr. Ian Goller and the Goller Foundation. That's, I think, at some point how we met years ago. And I was an expert therapist, teaching therapists around the world. mind-body perspectives in clinical practice. Nothing to do with children, nothing to do in education. And then there was a committee in Israel, Synchronicity, about how integrative medicine is being practiced in Israel and being taught in Israel, and how it should be taught and how it should be practiced. And there was a gap. There's still a gap. And I was on this committee and I met someone that I've never heard exist before. She was head of a department in the Ministry of Education, responsible for health promoting schools. I didn't know it exists. I was in the therapeutic business, mind-body medicine. And I liked the concept, health promoting school. I didn't think about it before. And I tried to inquire what is packaged in the package. And at the time, it was mostly teaching about nutrition, right way of eating, not smoking, less sugar, moving the body in a different ways, etc. There was nothing about consciousness awareness in the package. So I said, oh, I may add something. And she heard what I say, and she said, oh, I like it. Yes, I agree. Health promoting school should also figure something about what does that mean for a health promoting school. I didn't have the solution. I only brought holistic principles. I began to give lectures around the country through the Health Promoting School initiative under the Ministry of Education. And after one of my presentations, a school principal called me and said, I was impressed. I was touched. I'm convinced. I want to meet you. And we met. And she said, I want your full program for my whole school. And we have a budget. And I said, great, yes. And inside I said, oh my God, we don't have a full program. And we had to make one. And what came up was, I think, the first mindfulness in education as a whole school model, part of the curriculum for age 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, ongoing, boom. With supervising and educating the teachers, but experts that we recruited doing it as an expert teacher. Like you know, you have in schools, in most schools around the world, we have the homeroom teacher, the main teacher, and then you have specialty teachers, the math teacher and the computer teaching expert, etc. So we brought our sort of experts, part of the curriculum and the school faculty. The year that started was 1998, speaking about time frame, about 23 years ago, and we didn't know what we are doing. We tried to do the best we can. It was a combination of whole school, once a week for each class, multiplied by 20-something classes, ongoing for the whole year by year, and training the teachers in parallel, hoping first for them not to interfere, and even more hope if they can learn it good in a good enough way to do a little bit of that in their own way, in their own classes, beyond the 45 minutes once a week. After 2 years, more schools began to be interested. Health promoting school, non-health promoting school, and we began to try to figure what are we doing, because if they want it, it seems that something is working. We didn't know what is working because we didn't research it. We were very naive. We just did it. And we knew of no one else doing it. I wish we would know of someone else doing it to compare notes and learn. So that's how it started. And the model, I think, was unique. Each model is unique right now in mindfulness in education. The specificity of the uniqueness was it was a whole school model. It was once a week for 6 years, ongoing. It was led by trained people, with the teacher being hopefully trained in parallel. And in its 45 minutes, And it's a mix of stillness-based practices, lying down, standing, sitting, with no movement, and movement-based practices, obviously inspired by yoga adapted for children aged 6 to 12. And it was obviously inspired by mindfulness-based practices and by imagery-based language. And in the beginning, we didn't figure that we need to dialogue. So it was just us guiding, like a yoga class, meditation class. We guide the class. That's how we started. And we hoped for the best. We hoped for them to obey. Sooner or later, they taught us that there's something they want to say. And we began to figure something so stupidly simple. We need to ask them. We need to communicate with them, not only tell them to close their eyes and move this way or that way and be still and imagine and breathe and notice the body, etc. We need to dialogue and communicate. So that's in short. Not too many schools in Israel are still with the whole school model. We have one school that has been doing it for the last 20 years.
Wow.
I think there's no other such school in the world, I think.
That's extraordinary. Has anyone done any research? That's extraordinary.
Right. And yes, I've done a few research studies. A colleague of mine did a few research studies. And I think the interesting piece is a non-research. Again, I think that's my bias. In our field, I learn more from anecdotes, like from one child, from one teenager, from one teacher, definitely maybe not more, but not less than sophisticated double-blind research in our field. We learn a lot.
I agree, Nimrod. I've actually find that for many years, I take notes from what I learn in the lesson from the children. And I found that more valuable than any book or any research that I've read. I've actually literally learning on my feet because they have so much to teach us.
Right. So before I ask you a question about what you think is your unique way of doing it, because again, I think by watching what's happening around the world, New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada, Austria, England, etc., Israel, from what I observe, each model has its own unique way of doing it. And we can learn by looking at it objectively and learn from looking at it and from what each one of us is doing. So just one anecdote, not on the level of one student or one teacher or one child or one parent, which I'm sure you have a lot of anecdotes and me as well, but one anecdote relating to this whole school doing it for 20 years. When we started with that school 20 years ago, it was in a very bad shape as a school. The culture, the climate, the grades, the violence was terrible. And it was so bad that the school principal actually took off for 1 year to breathe, to relax, and hesitating if to continue or to try another profession or to go back to that school. She was on the edge. Eventually, she did a lot of inner work and came back. And when she came back, she chose us, the program. 10 years later, all Israeli schools were assessed by grades and culture. And the results were forced to be open to the public. The Ministry of Education wanted not to show the results, but the Supreme Court said, no, you have to release it, should be public knowledge. The culture of each school and the grades of each school. And that school that started 20 years ago and was measured among all Israeli schools 10 years ago was among the top 3 in the countries top 3 in the country in grades and culture.
Wow, isn't that wonderful? What an incredible acknowledgement and testimony to the work. How thrilling. Mm.
So what do you think? I mean, as you mentioned, you brought your art background and your teaching background and your meditation background and your passion for doing something about taking that and making it available to the world of children in educational contexts.
Yes.
But again, you've been doing it for quite some time. What do you think, in your words, will be your way of doing it? What do you think is specifically specific to your way of integrating your specific integration?
Well, I'm really absolutely passionate about educating children in this field. So that really means, if you go back to the Latin word, it means to draw out. And I constantly mull this over still. And I've come across quite recently a wonderful book called Life with Full Attention by Matra Bandhu. This is he teaches in England, in London, and gosh, some of the words in that book just literally jumped off the paper for me. And he says in that book that mindfulness is caught, it's not taught. So I absolutely feel that my role is to draw children out, not just, this old idea that you're filling them up, that you are, there's some pecking order, that you are the teacher and they are the students. It's actually not that, it's this. You are present and level with them, you're on the same page, and creating that connection, creating that safe, joyful space for them, because it concerns me actually because a lot of my friends are teachers, and so I've been a consultant for years. I've been a consultant doing this work for over 20 years. So I haven't been permanently in a school, but I'm aware of, life in schools, and it's stressful. It's stressful. And it's actually even stressful, and I see it in the schools I go into, in primary schools. I'm passionate about welfare for animals, and in Australia, I can't believe that we still have chickens in cages. We do, because I see the eggs but I actually really think that for some children, their lives are like they're in cage, they're battery. It doesn't serve them to be stuck at a desk and have every hour of their day scheduled. And it's almost like force feeding. I think that children astound me by how intelligent they are and how creative. And I think we need to absolutely respect them when we teach mindfulness and meditation, respect their abilities. And so when I go into a class, of course, I have a plan. I have a very detailed plan, and I have, things that I might draw on the board, and I might have teaching aids. But I'm very mindful that it's their class, and they co-create that class with me. And so I put quite a bit of effort into, drawing them out, getting their opinions, getting their input. So we do spend quite a bit of the class discussing. And I would always have a theme that I use for any age group. So we have a particular focus, and that may even be a storybook. I find it quite touching that even our final year in primary school, they just love stories, and even old classics Like I spent a whole year, I've taught for 14 years at Geelong Grammar School, which has been an absolute blessing for me because I have been able to follow through in children's lives. I go each term and I see them each term. And, well, for some of them, I've taught them from prep right through to year 7 or 8, which is just wonderful. And so it is really a holistic approach, and I am there to support them to join the dots, to make their own personal, unique discoveries, because it can never, I don't think, be one size fits all, because how could it be? Some of us are more auditory, some of us respond more to visual prompts and kinesthetic. So we need to have a palette to bring to children so they find their way with that. So that's really a short answer to that question, Nimrod.
How do you use how is your art background? How is it being integrated in your observation? The fact that you've been teaching art, is it useful, or is it part of your history, but it's not expressed much in the class with
Oh,
mindfulness?
no, it's
Or how
integral.
do you integrate it?
It's integral. It's I laugh at myself because it's just will always be in my heart. And in my work, when I'm not out there in doing my consultancy work and teaching, I'm making things. I mean, I used to teach craft. Can you imagine? I used to have a subject called craft. I used to actually spin wool with children and we'd weave it. That was like another era. But I make things. Like I actually, for Geelong Grammar a couple of years ago, I made a lycra brain, which is like a puppet, which has got the nervous system coming out from the bottom. So all the children, it looks like an octopus, and they could actually hold different bits of the nerves coming out from the brain and think about, literally with their hands, all connected, think about all the gifts we can feed into our brain from our heart, from the soles of our feet, by the shape we're in. So that's an example. But I also often take, and I take visceral sort of art materials like crayons and color pencils, never plastic felt tip pens, because there's no tone or quality, you can't get your hands. And so I actually get children to draw how it's just a meat, and I explain to them, this is not a piece of art you're going to give mum on Mother's Day, because unfortunately that does happen in art rooms. It's like, this is the task, you're going to make a gift for mum or whatever it is, and it's kind of like this product that art can sometimes be in their minds. So it's literally a spontaneous, and I just love doing this with children. So they get a piece of paper and they draw what their cells would look like when they've danced, or what their heart would look like after a meditation. And I often get them, when we have discussions, I invite them to share the whiteboard. And so one practice that I love doing is they all sit and with their eyes closed and just practice being curious to see what comes when I play exquisite classical music, like a piece of Bach, the Air Concerto, for example. And then they take it in turns to stand up. They love doing this, to draw on the whiteboard what they experience. And they can't believe how different it could be. And I've been blown away. I take photos with my phone and keep records. But I remember this is literally Bach's Air Concerto. One child drew this sort of clouds with a rainbow. Another child drew a face with tears coming down. And that just it's beyond words, and they all just have an amazing time realizing the uniqueness of our personal experience that can be prompted by something like a piece of Bach music. So that's just an example, Imran.
So you've been doing it for quite some time, and I know that you are not just guiding and dictating mindfulness and movement and forcing them to make a drawing. That's obviously not the case. You are working in a togetherness way, in a
Invitation.
collaborative way,
It's
learning together in a way.
Yeah, that's right. It's a shared experience. And
Right.
what about
So
you? Would you like to talk about how your unique approach, your model?
obviously it's not mine, but the model that I'm a little attached to. Uh, uh, and so I think one is this word that you mentioned, holistic. You mentioned this word because I came from medicine, from mind, body, holistic, and integrative medicine, and it means something on the context of principles. It may not be clear in the context of the pedagogy, but it's here in me. The concept of looking at the whole child, and you related to that. That's why that's my justification to integrate stillness and movement, looking in and looking and listening to the outside and looking at the outside and meeting each other and meeting oneself and hearing us together speaking with respect to whatever one is expressing. And then silence, no speaking whatsoever. And sometimes standing, sometimes stretching, sometimes closing the eyes, sometimes meeting someone and imitating his movements in a mirror way. So that multiplicity, integrative multiplicity, makes me happy because it's looking at the child on its many, many different intelligences and many different yearnings. In the context of books, by the way, there's a beautiful book that someone gave me when I started 20 something years ago. And it's an old book, and it's not even a mindfulness book, but there's so much mindfulness mindset in it that I love it and recommend it still. And the name, I think once upon a time, I think I may have told you the name. The name is The Art of Learning. It's an old book, black and white, and it's the art of learning through movement. And it says in the very beginning, there's a quote, and it says, children wants to learn. And I never thought about that. Children wants to learn, and the key is total involvement. And then they continue when the child has put all of his mind and enthusiasm and his imagination and his body and his heart into the experience, he will learn. Not only he will learn, he will also grow. So I think this is what I try to do and what you try to do. In the context of basic ingredients, like you bring art and I bring imagery. When I first came to Australia as an expert, I was an expert in imagery-based perspectives in clinical practice. That's what I taught for the Gola Foundation. So with children, I obviously we see it again and again. Mindfulness is, for adults, is lacking imagery-based language. There's almost no imagination. It's very unique methodology, but there are no images in the language. Close your eyes, that's it, fine. Sit, great. Bring your attention to the breath, and when the attention goes somewhere else, bring it back. But what if to the child, we say, slowly close your eyes, like inner curtains, and sit like a mountain and be like a rock. And then feel the wave in the cave breathing in your abdomen. So there's a lot of imagery-based language and also imagery scripts that are backing us up, not necessarily for mindfulness, but for the benefits. Because mindfulness is not for its own sake, it's for cultivating, for developing,
I couldn't agree with you.
for enhancing, for deepening competencies and developing skills.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's a few pieces. And I wonder, because what did you learn? What did you learn because you listen to the children, you dialogue with the children, you create situations when they make a drawing and you watch the drawing. That's also a feedback. And you're looking forward to the feedbacks that they give, verbal, non-verbal, etc. What did you learn from these feedbacks? Or can you give a little anecdote as well? Because sometimes we learn from anecdotes. So can you just package quickly, what did you learn and what did they teach you that we should know?
I actually, there's such a big question to answer in a short space of time, because I've had over 20 years being in classes with children and had some extraordinary experiences, and I'm wondering which one to refer to, because there are a lot of ones that are really memories in my heart. They're not just kind of in my brain, it's deeper than that. There's things that have just taken my breath away. And the thing I think to really remember as a teacher doing this work is to be humble, to have humility, and to not assume things about children. And particularly for me, because I'm a consultant, I go here, there, and everywhere. I don't know these children. I don't know. I mean, I've got pretty good at picking up clues about, what's going on, maybe getting a sense of how they are in that moment. But I've ended up, going into schools where there's one school I went to and I did a 6-week course, and one little boy, and they didn't even tell me, I didn't even find this out until the end of the first lesson, actually, that he had suffered significant abuse at home. And he actually was under the table. And he was under the table for 4 lessons. He did not feel, and of course I absolutely respected that, but I'll never forget that experience, because he was under the table, but he was actually participating. He was doing all the little things. Obviously, he wasn't standing up, because we have so much in common, Nimrod. I do the first thing that happens when children, even before children come into the room, sometimes it's never just, one approach, but we prepare for the class outside the room, taking off our shoes. They always take their shoes off, because I remind them that our feet are like our hands. In fact, one of my passions now is Nia, which is a mindfulness movement dance form, and they refer to the feet as our hands on the earth. I love that. And so they actually feel the soles of their feet before they even come in the room. So they're getting grounded by that experience. And whether they notice or not, they're mindfully walking into the room. But this little boy, by lesson 5, came out. He came out from the table. It was like my heart just sort of took over my whole body. So it's just this wonderment, really, the thing to realize that is always possible, and to be really fascinated and very curious about what can be possible, because there absolutely can be transforming moments. I've even had a transformative moment with the Sultana. I don't know, in Israel, you use that word. That's an Australian word for a dried grape. I know in America it's a raisin. So, And I learned that from Angola when I was going through a divorce, that practice. And it blew me away because during that time that I was focusing totally on that sultana, and it was actually about a 10-minute practice on one tiny sultana. I completely detached from all my worries, and they were big fears, big worries, big grief, and I was present in the moment. So it's kind of like can have this beginner's mind and this incredible adventure. To think of it, teaching children is like this amazing adventure. You just don't know what might happen in those classes, and it's a wondrous thing. And I've got many other anecdotes, but there's not that much time. So that's a start anyway. What
This is
about you?
great.
What about you?
Well, there are a few things which I've learned that now I'm almost hesitant to express because it seems stupid. How did I not figure it before? But I didn't. So one is the pedagogy, at least the one I would prefer. I say I would prefer because different models are using different pedagogies. In England, it's a 45 minutes for 9 weeks. In Israel, it's a 45 minutes for 6 years. In England, they sit on their chair. In Israel, they're on the mattresses on the ground, and they stand, they move, they lie down, they sit, they integrate, they interact, they speak in a circle, etc. So I'm a little biased to, obviously, I'm biased to the model that I'm biased to. Forget the whole school, just the integration. So the pedagogy, in the pedagogy, there is what we explain, what you explain sometimes, using your teaching aids, etc. We don't have time, but I think you are very skillful in using a whole variety of teaching aids beyond what we do here or beyond what's being done elsewhere. So that's, what do we teach in the pedagogy? That's one component. What's our Dharma talk? What's our teaching? That's not the main piece. In typical education, that's the main piece of teaching and educating by didacting or dictating, etc. Our main piece is the experience. So we need to be smart enough and skillful enough and creative enough and childlike enough in order to make the child listen to our guidance and follow the inner movement according to what he is being invited to follow. So, and that will hopefully build a significant enough experience from within. And our learning pyramid is based not on information, but on the significant enough experiences. If they're not significant, forget it. We lose them.
Yes, I would agree.
We cannot build a pyramid of change, of transformation, of transition, of insights, etc. So now we have so one component is the didactic, the explanation. Second is the experiential, and it should be good enough, maybe relaxing enough, weird enough, unusual enough, giving hope enough, etc. That's the experience. Third is only if we have an inquiry, how do we create a climate for more now insights to appear? Beyond what we said, beyond the experience, is the component of insight coming from there. Again, insight from within. And sometimes insight from one is enlightening everyone and us.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's the insight component. And that can, only if we listen, this will happen. And how much do we devote to didactic, to experience, to dialogue for insights, or for them to get insight by drawing between them and themselves? That's another potential for insight. When they see their own drawing, when they hear their own friend, when they hear themselves, when they see what they wrote. So that's the expressive piece. And then in the didactic is us or me or we wanting them to remember it consciously or unconsciously for them to recall it consciously or unconsciously and to apply it consciously or unconsciously for their own self-leadership, self-management.
Mm. Mm.
And that's another component. What do we do to make that more likely to happen? Sometimes it's just asking. I came to one class after 6 weeks. I was not the teacher. I was supervising the teacher in doing it. I came after 6 weeks. It's a new school. They were 8 years old or 9 years old. And she began the morning beginning of a class, and she introduced me. And I asked her permission, and I said, can I ask them a question? And she said, oh, sure, why don't you ask them also? I said, sure, can I ask you a question? Obviously, they love to be asked questions. I'm a foreigner, they've never met me. 9 years old, and I said, you've been with Meital, the facilitator, mindfulness facilitator, for 6 weeks, and I wonder if anyone here tried to remember what Meital was teaching and to use it somehow at home. Simple question. And not everyone raised their hand, but a few did. And one girl, I let her speak to tell me her story. She raised the hand and she said, my dad is very big, maybe compared to her, I don't know, very big. And when he's shouting, it's frightening. When he's not happy with something in my room. And usually when he's shouting, I'm screaming, and then sometimes I'm being punished because you shouldn't scream at parents. And I said, okay. And she said, and last week it happened again. But instead of screaming, I put my hands on the abdomen, and with my fingers, I counted my breath. And because I counted my breath with my abdomen expanding and inhaling, exhaling, because I counted my breath, I didn't scream. And I said, and what happened? And she said, my father was astonished because I didn't scream. He looked at me. It took, it take 30 minutes, 1 minute, that's all. So he looked at me, and I wasn't screaming, I was counting my breath. And then he smiled at me and left the room.
How wonderful. That's what a beautiful experience, and incredible for that such a young child to join those dots and put it into practice. That's amazing.
So from that and from many similar anecdotes, I learned that our potential positive outcomes, so there's the pedagogy and this, etc. And there's what are our potential positive outcomes. And the way I figure it now, again, I didn't figure it 20 years ago. I was too naive and stupid. Now I'm a little smarter. Our positive outcomes first is we need to be, again, smart enough, creative enough to create a situation for as many as possible, for as many children as possible to experience a positive enough experience. And we would never know unless we ask them, what did you experience? Simple question.
But the thing to be very mindful with that is, I absolutely agree, but the thing to be very mindful of that is that some children at times may not have a positive experience. And so when, some children in that class are quite euphoric about what they felt or experienced, you need to realize that some children may not. And so it's very important as a teacher to factor that in. And
yeah, I agree. It's not, when I say positive enough, I'm not going to punish those that had a significant negative experience. I was bored. This is very stupid. It made me sleep, etc. It's not relaxing at all. All kind of negative experiences, and we need to be able to deal with it in a positive way. That's on us, back to us. Second positive outcome is insights. We need to ask them, what did you maybe figure? What did you understand? Maybe after one class, after 6 classes, and that's a positive outcome. Insights. based on what we spoke, what we said, what they experienced, what they understood. That's positive outcome on the level of not experience, the level of positive, interesting, unique personal insights or collective insights. Third is children, I think you would agree, adults, like when you were interested in meditation, transcendental and then non-transcendental, you practiced. You were a practitioner. I was a yoga practitioner. I was a Vipassana practitioner. We need to practice in order to gain the positive outcome. But I'm not expecting children to be practitioners. And it's a whole question, how if we as adults, the only way for us to create some transformative positive outcomes is by practicing it, not by learning it, by practicing it. And if children are not going to be practitioners, why are we expecting positive outcomes at all? It's no way, no chance, but as we know, big chance, which is all interesting. How do we learn and how do children learn, and the big difference between us? Yeah. And what should we learn from the way they learn? So another positive outcome is the tools, what I call toolbox. And there are different tools that we give.
Absolutely.
And I would expect them to know what tools do they have in their toolbox, and to pull a tool and to use it. Exactly. To fall asleep, to concentrate, to relax, to reduce stress, etc. So that's the toolbox positive outcome. There's the competency. I would, something we don't know if I don't know if I'm more aware today. I hope I am more aware today. I don't know if I'm more compassionate to myself today. I hope those are competency, concentration competency, self-compassion competency, empathy competency, listening competency, awareness competency, concentration competency. So those are the positive outcome on the context of competencies. And then the habits, tendencies. Positive outcome is a new tendency. Instead of eating 3 chocolates a day when I'm stressed, I will do 3 mindfulness, counting my breath for 30 seconds a day. So those are the tendency or habits, new habits, as a positive outcome. And maybe there's more, which I haven't figured out yet. So this is something I've learned. Yes. I was a therapist for many years, but I've never learned that as a therapist, as an expert. This is something I learned by working with children.
Yes, I think going back to what you were saying about how can children practice, I think again, going back to the holistic model, and actually I'm very much work with play-based, fun approaches. So even with I do a lot of mindful movements, Nimrod. We start the lesson with mindful movements, coming into the classroom, and I'm actually saying language like, what shape are you in? And one lovely thing I do with them is actually reminding them how tall they are. And I've actually measured them against the wall, that when they're kind of slumped, this is amazing. They're amazed by this. And it's wonderful to amaze them. You can see it on their faces, that when they slump and then they remember their full height, there's actually about a 5 centimeter difference. I've measured them against the wall. And this is primary children. So actually having fun with it, playing with it, and then they can realize that they can slide that in to their life. They can slide it in to times when they're brushing their teeth. That can become a mindful balancing opportunity. So actually giving them these toolbox, as you say, and then helping them to realize that they can pull out these tools all throughout the day. And I constantly trying to win their classroom their teachers to even just spend a minute occasionally tuning into sound or tuning into sight or simple things, getting them to notice what shape they're in. I mean, that is practice, and it can be a tiny dose. It doesn't have to be, a formal 10-minute sitting practice. I mean, that's great too, but it can be in doses. That's why I call my business meditation capsules. But anyway, that can make it fun and varied, not just this or that. It's actually a whole palette that they can tap into with pleasure.
So I think in the context of time, we may need to end this engaged dialogue. And there's always unfinished businesses here. And it's a never-ending story.
It is. There's no destination. It's a journey. It's been delightful. I really enjoyed speaking to you, Nimrod. It's been wonderful. Really enjoyed it. So maybe we could meet again another time.
Yeah, or meet again. Who knows when? In face to face.
Well, that'd be amazing. We won't be holding our breath for that to happen, but thank goodness for Zoom. So thank you so much, Nimrod.
Thank you, Janet. And bye-bye.